In this lesson, we'll cover the steps to represent the stock used in machining the model. Creating accurately defined stock is very important because many of the toolpaths will actually see that stock and adjust the toolpath motion accordingly. We'll start by going to the Toolpaths Manager, and from there I'm going to expand the machine group and click on Stock Setup. Now there's multiple ways of creating stock. For example, if I knew the exact values of my stock, I could simply type it in here. But in many cases, when you start programming, you may not know what material you have to work with, so you'll put in something that best fits the model. Here I could select corners and then pick the two various opposite corners of my model, and it would see a Y value, an X value, and a Z value. I can also display the stock, which would make it displayed on my screen, and I can fit it to my screen as well. This is an unrealistic set of dimensions for stock, so we can either round these values or we can use another method to define our stock. So instead of using these values, let's put in different values by choosing the bounding box option. Now this bounding box option is identical to what we chose before, but in this case, these values for the bounding box will also be used in your stock setup. So just like before, I'm going to select the solid and hit End Selection. And at this point, I'd like to round these numbers to make them a little more realistic. So for example, X will be 2.625, Y we're going to round up to 5, and Z will round up to 1.75. And we're going to click on Create Corner Points in the Corner Points only. And the reason we're going to do this is because since these points will be created, we can then snap to those points with our gnomon to update the location of our WCS. So let's click OK, and we'll click OK again. So as you can see, our stock now is defined in red, and specifically that stock is not something you can select. However, since we used the bounding box function and we created points, we can select the points. If you want to quickly display and hide your stock, you can do so under the Toolpaths tab, and under the Stock group, simply unselect Stock Display. I'll keep it on, so I'm going to push it back on, and you could also shade it if that's something that you prefer. Now let's take a look at our Levels Manager again. So if you recall, we removed some of the levels that we created before that we did not use. And in this particular case, since level 11 was the active level, that's the level that my points were put on when I created them while defining the stock. So let's create a new level and we can put those points on that level. So I'm going to create a new level, level number 2, and the name will be called Stock Corner. And in this case, I'm going to select the individual points that were created using the bounding box, and I'm going to move those to a different level. Now, of course, there's many different ways that we can select these points. For example, I can hide the other geometry to make it easier, or I can just, as I'm doing now, select them individually. Now with them selected, I right-click, change level, and I'm going to move them to level 2, which is the active level. And now I can uncheck or hide the wireframe level, and you'll see now I just have 2 levels active. The one that contains the solid called MCU gas pedal, and level 2, which contains these points. So the last thing to do is to update the location of this plane. This is called Op1, so if we go down to the plane section, and I select Op1, I can actually go down and modify the origin. I could type in the coordinates, or in this case, I can specifically select a new location just by zooming in here and grabbing it. So now, my gnomon is lined up with the outside corner of the stock, and I was able to snap to the stock because of that point there. If that point was not created, I wouldn't have been able to snap to that stock. At this point, I'll right-click and go back to isometric view, and with my proper levels turned on, I'm just going to update the view sheet bookmark, which remembers which levels are on and off and which planes are turned on. So in this lesson, we looked at how to create planes, We looked at how to create levels and how to move geometry between levels. We'll be utilizing these features in future lessons as we start programming our parts in Mastercam.